I really appreciate this. You've been an amazing group with one another and with me, and I just really appreciate this so much. So this is the penultimate lecture from me. At the end of this day, we're starting on time. We'll make sure we end on time, 5 p.m., so you can go get some rest and some dinner. I also thought that since all of our brains are tired, I would reverse the order of things. I'll start with the discussion questions that we can have in our minds, and then I'm going to go to the primary literary text because that's been shortchanged sometimes. And then I'm going to go to the top and we'll think about the broader theoretical, historical, cultural stuff. So maybe like just shaking it up in those three ways will help us stay sharp for this next hour. I wanted to say that this idea of like COVID being traumatic, I'm not sure how kind of culturally specific that is. On the one hand, you would think that is universal. I don't know if you all remember where you were, if there was like a national proclamation of everything shutting down or if that's unique to the US, but I can tell you that I was on campus on Friday, March 13, 2020, and I was told I must pack up my things and I probably wouldn't return to campus for 2 weeks because the CDC said give it 2 weeks, and it turned out to be 9 months. And those 9 months, even coming back, people were very anxious. So we like suffered from isolation, we suffered from a sense of being cut off from one another, and then we also suffered with re-entry. So let me know during discussion if that experience resonates with you, or if you had a different experience with COVID. I know that different countries had different strategies for maintaining this unknown health event. But I'm starting from the place of COVID-19 was incredibly traumatic for a lot of reasons, and I still see my students struggling with the effects today. So the title is COVID Representation at a Remove. The literature we're discussing does not say the word COVID one time. The questions that I want us to reflect on at the end, are what might effective COVID representation look like? How is it significant that City of Laughter represents a euthanasia theme park for children? What makes the term euthanasia park so disorienting? And what other traumatic issues might City of Laughter represent at a remove? This short story is in your reading material, so if you didn't have a time to read it and you're interested in what we're saying today, it'll be there for you. I'm interested in it because it represents the figure of a vulnerable child, which is a figure we've been talking about the last 3 days. So let's start with the fiction first this time. Perhaps it is because of all of the work I was doing on futurity and children and the power of their linguistic creativity, which we talked about last time. I could not help but mourn the at least 17,400 deaths of children during the COVID pandemic. Reading City of Laughter seems to be an homage to them, uncannily speaking about the future, about a place where sick children can go and die. And let me just say that the national discourse in the States at the time was, do not worry about the children. They will be fine. The older people will die anyway, and the children will be just fine. They're not contracting it at a very large, frequent rate. But the fact of the matter is 17,400 individual children died, and that was always on my mind, right? Obviously in lesser numbers than adults, that's still 17,000 children. The title of the story, City of Laughter, is the name of a euthanasia park, an amusement park that could gently end children's pain. Roller coasters capable of lulling their passengers into unconsciousness before stopping their hearts. Critics called the proposal perverse accuse the state of giving up on the next generation. That's the way that this park is described in the very beginning. I'm interested in the fact that critics, our narrator Skip says, critics of the park say that the state is giving up on the next generation. Rather than try to find a way to help the children, they develop a euthanasia amusement park where they can go to die. To arrive at the euthanasia park, the narrator Skip, quote, has to drive through lifeless streets punctuated by a handful of shops and the orange haze of wildfires over the Los Angeles foothills. The newly homeless slept in their cars. Soup kitchens attacked lines, snaking through parking lots. Outside the city limits, billboards advertised funeral packages and antique barns that had been cleared for body storage or triage. I'm not sure if it surprises you or not that this is considered science fiction. Some of these things you could imagine today, right? In order to get to Euthanasia Park at work, Skip passes through wildfires over Los Angeles, homeless sleeping in their cars, snaking soup kitchens, funeral packages being advertised, and places that are located for body storage or triage. Welcome to the City of Laughter, the sign announces at the entry, as if it is an amusement park. The children likely do not know that this is where they are going to die. The narrator feels like he is arriving, quote, at a prison that was pretending to be something else. The barbed wire fences remained, and while the old signage had been removed from the concrete walls, the discolored outline of the word state penitentiary was still clearly visible. It's no accident that this amusement park was established in an old prison. There are still signs that it was a prison when they open the gates to the children. And it's significant that it's called City of Laughter. The prison imagery, which I should have put on a slide for you, and I failed to do that. So if you want to closely read this more, it's in your packet. But I wanted to spend some time on this idea of contagion and entrapment. Because of the possibility of contagion, no one was allowed to leave after entering the amusement park. It very much is still a prison. Quote, the central prison complex had been renovated into a pirate-themed shopping area and food court inappropriately named Dead Man Cove. Above us, rainbow spotlights scanned the ground from the guard towers. I could still see the silhouettes of their rifles amid the prismatic glow. End quote. As someone who lives very close to the site of a school mass shooting in Connecticut and who has friends who have lost children to gun violence, reading references to guns in a children's park makes me uneasy here. Skip is uneasy too. He asks if they are necessary, and his colleague says, quote, people aren't likely to run with their kids if they think they'll be gunned down. It's mostly for show, but you never know. Some of the guards are real wannabe commandos, end quote. This means that they want to feel heroic by gunning down, what an ominous phrase, families that change their minds. And there is the sequence about a family that does just that. They want to get out of the park and have their daughter die another way, and they are tackled by armed forces. So while I tend to read the story as an allegory about COVID, a COVID pandemic that came too soon, others of you might want to read it as a trauma narrative about something else, gun violence, or even children in prison, or even climate change, or homelessness. It's all there in this story. That being said, the disease itself sounds harrowing, safely putting the story into the category of writing about illness as well. The Arctic plague, it's called in the story, resulted in, quote, tiny body bags lining the streets. Skip recalls how, quote, crying parents could be heard at all houses of the night. the white buses that took away the deceased to be stored or burned or studied. At first, nobody knew what was happening. There were some rumblings of illness in Russia and Asia. We expected that any viral outbreak would warrant a simple trip to the pharmacy or a walk-in clinic, until the first American cases revealed something more serious." End quote. There is a way in which we can understand the coming of COVID, or the coming of the Arctic virus, as it's called in the story, as an event that happened too soon, that was not easily assimilated when it occurred. When Skip, the narrator, asks Danny, a child patient he meets early on, "Are you scared?" Skip seems to be asking after all of us. The description of the ride that sends children to their deaths, the Osiris, sounds straight out of a dystopia, and here is our first quote. "When every child was secured, the staff stepped back, creating a wall between the tracks and the crowd of parents, who were cordoned off several feet away, security staff at the ready. Joyous screams of the children grew to deafening levels. Brain function ceased in the second inversion, their little hearts quit pumping in the third. In 2 months, Skip puts 150 children on Osiris. Fitch, the special needs boy, loves space, and Skip must confront the day when he puts Fitch on Osiris himself. Fitch is a young boy he falls in love with because he's fallen in love with Fitch's mother. So they form a little family on the outskirts of the park. He must think about the ratio of good days to, quote, the ones that were almost unbearable to witness. There's our focus on witness. Working at the park, sending children to their deaths, takes a toll on the park's employees. So they have to deal with what they witness also. They have to deal with the guilt of putting children on Osiris that will go up and lead to their deaths. No neighborhood chit-chat or gossip, each of us holding a perpetual funeral in our hearts and minds. Eyes on the peak of Osiris, where loudspeakers blared Greg's morning mood right on time every day at 8 a.m., and the soft female voice, sometimes adopting a faux British accent, telling us to smile and laugh, to focus on the good we were doing for their children, for our country. It is hard to imagine how sending children to their deaths is good for the country. We can't help but hear the criticisms of the place, that rather than to try to help the children survive, the park is in place to help them die. It is like the tech bros, if you read environmental fiction, who invest in de-extinction, this massive scientific experimentation, rather than trying to stop climate change itself. The story is also worried about the effects of climate change, clearly, with the smoke rising in the background as Skip approaches the park. And he turns on the television to see, quote, families and wildlife fleeing their homes in and around the San Francisco area. Mere woods and ancient forests on fire sparked by a summer of unprecedented heat. The story ends when Skip needs finally to say goodbye to Fitch, and surprisingly, the story ends quite peacefully. Quote, the orange shimmer of the electric torches dotting the tracks washed over him, just enough so I could see his silhouette amid the excited horseplay of other children. I pushed the red button. This is where, it's a long quote, so I needed to start here. I pushed the red button and the chains of the ride clicked and clacked, pulling the train, another train image. We've had like 4 this week, right? So pulling the train upward. Each sound vibrated through my body, striking at the temptation to stop it all. Dory was standing with the other parents near the guarded perimeter gates. Oh, I was doing these, I'm sorry, typo. I sat back in the darkness of the booth waiting, and for a moment I thought I heard Finch's triumphant shouts, perhaps the happiest sound I will ever hear, and there was only the roar of the Osiris and then nothing at all. I'm interested in the focus of the triumphant laughter, the happiest sound. This is one of the last moments of the story. The narrator puts a young boy up on the Osiris where he goes to die. So reading this, I started wondering about what we wondered about with regard to 9/11 representation or any other kind of traumatic representation. Does a kind of story like this, addressing illness at a remove in a kind of science fiction fantasy way, is that an effective way to talk about illness, about death, about traumatic experience? How might we think, if we were writing criteria for the best kind of COVID representation, if there would be a genre of COVID novels, and I will talk about that in a second, there is, what would be appropriate? What would that look like? And how would City of Laughter fit? So that's our close reading to put the larger questions into perspective. Uh-oh. COVID is a possible point of departure for trauma studies in the 21st century. Like that's our assumption here, right? It brings together fields of trauma and narrative medicine, and it brings us up to date regarding contemporary crises and concerns. And clearly, like after we leave tomorrow, there will be another kind of, issue that we will need to grapple with to like find a set of texts around. Here are some books that directly or indirectly mention the experience of an illness that looks something like COVID. There's already a kind of tradition. Ling Ma's Severance, Laurie Moore's I Am Homeless If This Is Not My Home, Michael Cunningham's Day, Garth Greenwell's Small Rain, Hari Kunzru's Blue Rain, and Becca Walke's Ads, Louise Erdrich The Sentence, Allie Smith Companion Piece, Joan is Okay by Waiki Wang, Delphi by Claire Pollard, Violetta by Isabel Allende, The Fell by Sarah Moss, and Emergency by Daisy Hildyard. Why do I list all of these? To show that there is certainly a literary output and response. And we might say maybe this is authors trying to deal with something, trying to put into language a traumatic experience. But my question is like, why so many, and are they effective? Katie Waldman, writing for a major publication, has trying to figure out also what COVID did to fiction in the 21st century. And she says in the early self-improvement phase of the pandemic, people would sometimes comment on the opportunities that lockdown presented for arts and artists. They'd observe that Shakespeare wrote King Lear during plague times. Sometimes I think some of those revisitations of Shakespeare's time could be read as COVID narratives, but that might be another conversation. Or that Tony Kushner and Larry Kramer snatched inspiration from the AIDS crisis. I read a segment from Kushner's Angels in America yesterday. It was the slenderest of silver linings, jumbled up with terror and frustration. The idea that COVID might, if nothing else, produce enduring fiction. Were the Lear people right? So the question is, are we looking for a silver lining out of COVID? What would it mean to say brilliant minds kind of set down their pen to paper to try to represent this and ended up with great literature, like Shakespeare ended up with King Lear, like Tony Kushner ended up with Angels in America? 4 years after the virus began its worldwide demolition tour, the efforts of contemporary scribes of pestilence have borne fruit. This is still Katie Waldman. A heterogeneous body of literature now attempts to catch the import of the period from roughly March 2020 to the end of 2021. And they've written, she says, in all different forms, all different ways, fiction and nonfiction. And again, like at the end of our conversation today, I'm going to ask if you think City of Laughter belongs in this category. Despite the polyphony of approaches, a single note seems to sound throughout, she says, a tone of pummeling topicality, all sweaty masks and bottles of disinfectant, reverent about suffering and critical of the comfortable. Waldman does not like the tradition that's emerging. What accounts for this gulf, this profound anti-profundity? The realities of the pandemic, nearly 15 million deaths worldwide, spiking rates of domestic violence, drug abuse, and jobs loss, plummeting mental health, accounted to a seismic, totalizing emergency. And she goes on to say, for many people, the day-to-day experience was uneventful. Walk in endless circles around the block, retreat from strangers, update loved ones via glitchy, lonely FaceTimes from bed. One of my friends, Sarah Sink, who does the database of COVID testimony, has talked about it in terms of a tale of two pandemics. Some people were making sourdough bread, other people were on the front line seeing dozens and dozens of patients every day, and these two experiences were not the same. And so I wanted to remind us all of our conversation about Ziolkowski. So when he was writing his book on trauma studies, talking about modern technology associated with trains and warfare, he also seemed to be talking about illness and PTSD, addiction and chronic conditions, all things that are not easily defined. I liked the idea that he said there is one effect, but so many possible causes for that effect, and it's difficult to find a straightforward answer or narrative timeline. And I think that works for COVID representation too. The kind of elusive indirect writing stylized by Hoffman, Freud, and Kafka that Ziolkowski takes up marks the difference between the more literary How High We Go in the Dark, a story from which you read for today. That is literary, I would argue. And then there are other books like Marie Brenner's The Desperate Hours, One Hospital's Fight to Save a City on the Pandemic's Front Line, which is very graphic, very true to life. It is, in fact, a true story. And so I'm wondering, if you are going to pick up, or in 100 years, someone wants to pick up a book and kind of think about how the best authors of their day represented COVID, would you like the straightforward, the desperate hours, or would you prefer something more indirect, right? How High We Go in the Dark. How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu is a science fiction novel that imagines a theme park for assisted suicide. We looked at some of those passages. It's a loose and devastating allegory for our inability to describe the loss of countless children during the pandemic. The latter, the more scientific nonfiction, is a history that draws on examples and stories of over 100 people who worked at New York Presbyterian at the height of the pandemic, often losing the emotional resonance we seek in the literary work that can be more successful in describing the experiential truths of living in the coronavirus age. What is more true, right? The truth or science fiction or literary, lyrical poems, novels? Alexandra Alter for the New York Times says, the PTSD we're all going to have is not only going to affect how it's written about, this is the how question, but whether or not anyone will want to read about it, said the writer Tom Bissell, who advised novelists to steer clear of the topic in an essay for the Los Angeles Times. When you have a horrible global experience in which millions of people have died, what is there to explore artistically other than the fact that it was terrible? I'm a writer myself. I'm not quite sure what I think about this. Tom Bissell seems to be saying, why would you do that? Don't write about this. We don't need this right now. Which also helps us understand the debates from yesterday around 9/11 representation, right? Is it disrespectful? Are you trying to profit from human suffering? Is it too soon? Is it too late? So again, this is a question about representation and what literature can do, and I'm applying it to a discussion of this story. Alter says very little noteworthy fiction was written in direct response to the 1918 flu. We will pick that up tomorrow morning, which killed an estimated 50 million to 100 million people, but left barely a mark in the literary record. Most writers at the time avoided the topic and referenced it only obliquely, perhaps because it followed on the heels of World War I. Unlike a rousing war story, an invisible virus that strikes indiscriminately doesn't make for dramatic narrative. That all comes from Alter also. The flu drops out of cultural memory, says Elizabeth Autka, authors of Viral Modernism, the Influenza Pandemic, and Interwar Literature. So these are conversations about a pandemic from 100 years ago, and I'm wondering how much of that will apply to this pandemic we just came out of. I will also say that Tracy Thomas is the only scholar, critic, who lists How High We Go in the Dark as a pandemic novel. And I want to add to the conversation Lily Meyer from The Atlantic in March 2025. Oh. So this brings us up to date. March 2025 is the most recent word I've heard on COVID fiction. In July of 2020, a little less than 6 months after COVID-19 sent much of the world into lockdown, I reviewed 3 newly released books about the coronavirus pandemic for this magazine. 6 months is short in many contexts, but in publishing, it's no time at all. I referred to these speed demon titles as quick response art and wasn't impressed. Literature is a fundamentally reflective endeavor, and as I wrote then, these books largely described what was happening rather than thinking about it long enough to turn it into something different altogether. So I'm seeing the same kinds of things I've seen in attempts to represent other traumatic experience. Why does it seem that so many voices are saying, don't write about COVID, and if you do, don't make it boring, right? Katie Waltman says, the best writing about COVID is flexible, figurative, and hard to pin down. Rather than narrating the pandemic, it drives home the fact that the pandemic happened, that something broke apart, dispersed, and remains to be reconstituted. My question to you today, now that we are in the position as literary critics and theorists, is whether you would count How High We Go in the Dark as legitimate, powerful, effective COVID representation in response to how it captures the traumatic effects of COVID-19. And now I'm going to complicate that a little bit. While the date of publication of the collection, and on your publication sheet, says How Far We Go in the Dark was published in 2020, post-pandemic, the section of the novel that you read for today that focuses on the euthanized death of children was published in 2013 in a journal called Redivir. It is easy to read it as a post-pandemic story. Is that paradoxical? This 2013 story reads like a post-pandemic story, given its interest in illness, and it seems uncannily to have predicted the deaths of children in our future from COVID-19, which are not as high as other groups, we will admit, right, the number of deaths, but are striking nonetheless. I don't know if you do this. I went down a rabbit hole in the last couple of weeks looking at medical research on the effects of COVID on children, the rates of death of children. I'm not sure if that matters, and we're talking about fiction, right? But like from the perspective of representing a child death, I think it might be interesting. Among 4.4 million COVID-19 deaths worldwide, 0.4% occurred in children and adolescents under 20 years of age. 0.4% is not a huge number, right? That does not sound like a big percentage, but the number is actually quite high. 17,400 children died of COVID. Of the over 17,400 deaths reported in those under 20 years of age, 53% occurred among adolescents ages 10 to 19, and 47% among children 0 to 9. So when media sources began to say that we can be more relaxed with children for the very reason that these small death counts. So I'll end maybe with one of the last studies I looked at, and I know it's neither here nor there maybe, but it helps us kind of put into perspective like the historical context of the story. And it also helps us understand Fitch, who is already very sick, right? I think that's what I'm getting at. In previously healthy individuals, less than 21 years of age, infection with SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes coronavirus disease, 2019. This is scientists speaking, I'm sorry, but there maybe are scientists in here who can help us. It's a typically asymptomatic or mild, with recovery expected within 1 to 2 weeks. An estimated 7% of children with COVID-19 are hospitalized, and 28 to 33% of hospitalized children require intensive care. While individuals less than 21 made up of less than 2% of reported COVID-19 cases as of April 13, 2021, more than 2.8 million cases and 377 deaths associated with COVID in U.S. children were reported to the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This is the part that interests me. In the case series of individuals under 21 with SARS-CoV-2 associated death, most decedents were older adolescents or young adults members of a racial ethnic minority groups. Obesity, developmental disorders, and asthma were the most commonly reported underlying conditions. So we're kind of thinking about marginalized voices in this class. That's what Carruth says, that's what Freud says, that's what Keenan says. Listen to the voices of others. And so I'm kind of thinking about what it means to worry about the people of color, the children with disabilities, and developmental disorders, obesity, and asthma. How do we care for them? The children may be at increased risk of decompensation, the experts say, during hospitalization and should be monitored closely if admitted to the hospital. So these are the vulnerable ones, right? And that's what leads me to City of Laughter. So a few questions, like, should we be worrying about this? Can tell me no. Like if you're a state planner, maybe some of you will be mayors, leaders of your towns or communities. You have to come up with a policy of how best to get people through a pandemic. Do we think about the 17,400 when there are so many other people in the world, right? And then once you have an epidemic or a pandemic, is it appropriate to write about? When is it too soon or not? What you do with the idea of a story that focuses on a euthanasia. What you do with the idea of a story that focuses on a euthanasia park for children. I feel like we just need to take a step back and consider that. And what other traumatic issues City of Laughter might address if you don't want to go the COVID-19 route. So how are you feeling? It looks like I feel all of our brains are tired. What's easier at this point, or harder? Yes, thank you. Someone will decide our trajectory for the next 25 minutes. Oh, there's a microphone on the table.
Yeah. So I would like to take up this point, whether we need pandemic literature or not. My answer would be an emphatic yes.
Okay.
The question where I may have a different opinion is, when is the right time to write about COVID,
Yes.
write literature about fiction on COVID? I think not immediately. And I agree with you that in some way the effect of COVID continues. We have not come out fully from the trauma of COVID.
Yes.
But I would like literature, fiction on COVID to be written for the future generation.
Yes.
The generation that comes after should know and has a legitimate need to know what it was to have endured this pandemic, those who survived, those who were not so lucky to have survived. So what was this time like?
Yes.
You know, and no kind of journalistic writing or report or record of the time could convey that message as powerfully as the literature can.
Yes, thank you.
And so I am in the favor of writing. Now the next question that is related to it is whether one should be writing directly about COVID or writing around it, like City of Laughter, if it can be considered as a literature or fiction on COVID or not. I think my answer, it may differ from others, would again be that a literature or a fiction on COVID must be written directly about COVID.
Okay.
And not around it.
Okay. Do not write around it. Is that what
Yeah.
you're saying? That's interesting.
Thank you.
Okay. So a couple of really important points here. We need a literature, yes, a literary register. I saw how boring it was to read through that, like, Journal of American Medicine percentages of, like, the different people who were affected by COVID. Like, that does not touch me in my soul. Literature might, right? Like, that is why we're here. We study literature. But you're absolutely right. Like, what the critics will say is literature written between 2020 and 2021, that's, maybe that's not the best kind of literature. There wasn't enough time to process it, so it's just like a daily record of events. This happened, and this happened, and now we have, like, these numbers. But that's interesting, right? Like, what if some of our best writers, and this goes back to, like, the King Lear effect, right? What if some of our best writers writing today give it a couple of years and write their masterpiece? And that is something that is taught in 100 years to help others, like 100 years from now, understand the history that we lived through in 2020. So all of your points are so well taken. And then, like, this is something we might argue with, though. Like, but as you say, if we're going to do it, we better do it. We better say COVID pandemic. We better say 2020 to 2022. We better call it what it is, and not do some kind of metaphorical, like, Arctic plague kind of thing. Is that what you're saying? Like that? Okay, I love it. Other thoughts? Yes.
Okay, ma'am, just to add to this conversation, I think there was a quote from Lily Meyer that you earlier showed.
Yeah, should I find it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So here it is said that I referred to those speed demon titles as quick response art.
Yeah.
And wasn't impressed. Literature is a fundamentally reflective endeavor. So I think that's what you both were pointing to, that if written after a few years of like reflecting on this catastrophe,
Yes.
so we may find new ways and new insights into this heinous thing that happened.
Great point. Yeah, I mean, it was devastating, right? We need to take some years to reflect on it, its effects socially, culturally, financially. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I love that phrase. I had forgotten about that. Speed demon titles, quick response art. That's not what we're going for. Okay. Other thoughts? Would anybody advocate for how high we go in the dark? a euthanasia park story? What is the effect of writing this story, reading this story?
Actually, the title itself, Euthanasia Park,
Yeah.
is like contradictory.
Yes.
Because euthanasia and park don't go together well.
Yeah.
Because park is something we associate with happy memories.
Yes.
And euthanasia, nothing need to be said about that. So the title itself is, disturbing
Yes.
at so many levels.
Yes. Yes.
And also, like, euthanasia is such a debatable subject. It is not yet clear that should we allow it or should we not allow it.
Great point.
In many countries, it is still not allowed, I think.
Yes.
And at what condition or what is the limit at which you allow euthanasia?
Yes.
That's also a debatable thing. So I think that's why we find it disturbing, the title itself.
Yeah, but it's also, it connects to your point too, which is this is not about COVID. Like the factors or the circumstances are not the same. Like we cannot imagine bringing a child who is suffering with COVID to a euthanasia park. Like we're not at that point, right? But what about if there were like an Arctic virus, right? Like what would you do in these cases? And as you say, that's a very provocative, personal conversation to be having as well. So maybe we can look at I'm really interested in how the story represents witnessing. Okay, this one. Maybe we can end here. What do you do? I mean, I think there's a kind of truth to this, right? What if you are a medical professional or someone whose job it is to assist with suicides, or you see mass death every day? How do you handle that? No neighborhood chit-chat or gossip, each of us holding a perpetual funeral in our heart and mind. Eyes fit on the peak of Osiris, where loudspeakers blared Greg's morning mood right on time, every day at 8 a.m., and the soft female voice, sometimes adopting a faux British accent, telling us to smile and laugh, to focus on the good we were doing for children, for our country. I think that's eyes fixed on the peak of Osiris in the second line, if that helps you. Yeah. How does this describe the experience of witnessing the death of children?
I think if I try to describe it in one line,
Yes.
then it is like trying to make something look normal, which is absolutely not normal.
Beautiful. That's okay. So important. 8 a.m. every day. We have a kind of we have a routine, right? This is what's going to happen. It'll kind of set people at ease. As long as that song plays at 8 a.m., we keep going. Nothing to worry about here, right? Morning mood seems a little ironic also. Obviously, it's the morning, it's 8 a.m., but morning mood seems a little inappropriate. Then again, you're not going to start the day with a death fugue or a dirge, right? So absolutely, like structuring their day, like everything seems pretty consistent. Okay. Other phrases. Thank you. Yes. We need the microphone. Yeah.
To add to that point, when we were looking at the news channels during this COVID time, we were not getting what exactly is happening at hospitals and everything.
Exactly.
So here, when we talk about this park, this is also symbolizes that we are we are trying to cover it or mask it as we were masking the reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just kind of think about that ongoing anxiety in the beginning, like say March 2020. You know that there is a virus coming, that it is killing people. You don't know it's a virus actually, right? Like what causes it, under what circumstances. Like when you're in the middle of it, you have no sense of what to expect or even how to protect yourself.
Even people were hiding the deaths at family. Might be if someone has been died because of this virus, they'll not discuss it. They'll say
Yes.
some other thing happened so that they don't like isolate the family or send them. So this is what this park is also symbolizing.
Yes, beautiful.
I want to add here one point. When you asked, do we need this kind of literature or not? So this entire COVID scenario, it is no less than a genocide. Lot of people, lot of kids were dead. So, when we were discussing Holocaust, the role of ethical listeners, the role of listening, I think that part should be covered first instead of writing it down, coming to literature so soon. I think the virus, this COVID thing, it will also generate new kind of theories, new kind of philosophies that we need, how to think about it, how to read about it, in which angle should we read, what to be discussed, what not to discuss, because there are a lot of do's and don'ts also when it comes to the COVID.
Yes.
So this is what I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, how do you not try to deal with the fact of so many deaths, right? Like, this seems like a monumental concern for all of us humans on the planet. Yeah, so maybe it's not simply kind of what kind of deaths they were, but the sheer amount would have to take a toll on humanity.
Death is a kind of thing that is very personal for us, and as individuals, we are free to grieve the way we want.
Yes.
But it is interesting to see that whenever death occurs on a huge level, everything turns into a very corporate kind of way. You know, that the way things are handled when deaths happen on a huge level, and that is why, and that is what we can see in those lines as well. We saw, we felt the pandemics. Fortunately, we are surviving, and many of us faced those traumatic days. So it's very important and interesting that the way literature is portrayed and the way lines have been composed, to see that the kind of emotion is missing, because they are also written in a very corporate kind of way.
Yes. As you were talking, I was thinking about the way the death. Here, maybe this is it. The way that the lead up to the death was handled, which seems very orderly and very corporate and rule following, right? So I love that point. Death is very personal. We handle it all in the same way. But in this amusement park, everybody goes through it in the exact same way. You load up your child. What are some other details? There's a wall between the tracks and the parents. The parents are cordoned off. There's a security staff at the ready that's already very... And it's... Oh, okay, because you know what? I ate my mango at lunch, and I made the screen sticky, so that's why I'm having a hard time with the slides. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so between that, the security staff, and then the joyous screams of the children, like that just seems so inappropriate to me. And back to the other kind of corporatization of death is, on his way in, Skip sees a billboard selling like funeral accoutrement, right? So now it is also for sale.
Also, I want to add that I want to add one thing. There's an actor known as Akshay Kumar in Indian cinema, particularly Bollywood, and we have a running joke on memes and on Instagram that whenever a tragedy happens, Akshay Kumar is the first one who runs to the the director's office to get a script on it. Okay, so this points to the fact that how soon scripts should be made, written, or fiction should be written about a tragedy. So I think Akshay Kumar is the one.
That's great. Yeah, this idea of, like capitalizing on the moment, right? Like you want to get people's attention. We're all kind of worrying about the same thing. Like there's your audience, right? That's a great connection. So maybe the last question I'll ask is, how do you decipher the timeline on COVID representation? Like, what if we went back to read, what's a good example? What if we went back to read City of Laughter, which was written before 2020? If it seems like it represents an experience that felt like COVID, does that count as COVID literature? Could we say something like it uncannily predicts our future? That's what a trauma theorist would say, right? It was literature that did not know what it knows. And we have some ideas that say, no, like if we're going to commemorate COVID, it should have been written after COVID, and it should be kind of pretty respectful of the details. So I guess I'm asking this question because you see that a lot, right? You see in literature representations of traumatic events before the traumatic events happen. And then you think, wow, literature knows what we don't know. Or maybe you think this is just the author who understands how history works, right? These things happen over the course of time repeatedly. So do you have any thoughts about that? Is City of Laughter a COVID story published before COVID?
I'd just like to give an example from Germany. Like I believe it was Heinrich Heine, who about 100 years ago, from Nazi times, I believe in the 19th century, he predicted that those who are burning books today will burn people later on. So that prenomination happened, although 100 years later, but in Nazi Germany it happened.
Yeah.
So he was not talking about that.
Yes, exactly.
But somehow he predicted the future.
Yes.
Similarly, as you suggested, that this literature is not actually about COVID, but somehow it seems to us that it was predicting something like that.
Yes.
The death of children and how it happened in COVID. And as you already said, that 17,400 is not as big a number like million, but still, those parents who lost their child, they suffered. So I believe even if we cannot directly say that it is like post-COVID literature, at least when we talk about COVID, as Sir suggested, that it has to be direct. But even if it is not direct, even if it goes like leeways takes through it, but still if it is the motive, the theme is about the same thing, then we can at least take it near that title or theme, and although not consider it directly the COVID literature, but something related to it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's ultimately an argument about how language works, right? Like, it's not about COVID or not COVID. It's about the way we read language for the fact that it's living. Like, we're thinking about connotations now. We have the history of COVID in our heads, for example, or the history of Nazi Germany, and we bring that with us to a reading of language that was not concerned with COVID, but we see it. Now language means that. It connotes that. So that's a very kind of philosophical, theoretical, linguistic approach.
Ma'am, in addition to what I said before, in connection with trauma studies, I would like to bring this again to the focus that COVID pandemic was a personal tragedy to million of people, million of survivors. I was reminded of one article that appeared 1 year before in one of the newspapers in India. The title of the article was, "Why have we not yet memorialized COVID pandemic?" Like, for example, there is a memorial dedicated to 9/11, similarly to the Second World War, etc. But why have we not yet done a similar kind of thing for COVID pandemic?
Yeah.
So the article seemed to answer that maybe because it is still too close to us.
Okay.
Still, it is very alive in the sense that many of us, many of our relatives, friends have gone through that. They have suffered from it. So maybe it is still very fresh to have a distance from it and think about it. My point is connecting to trauma studies, that so many people have undergone this trauma of having lost their family members, their relatives. So the ethical need of bearing witness to that is also a factor which must go into thinking of producing literature on COVID pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. So I do feel like that the memorialization point is really significant, right? Like, I feel like I need somebody to say that was incredibly traumatic what you lived through. We're just meanwhile going on, like, every morning we wake up at 8:30 and hear morning song, and it's like we're all acting like that wasn't so scary and so horrifying. And if we kind of think about how the theory of repression works, right? It means it's going to come back. Like, we're all going to act those fears out, those feelings out in certain ways. So why don't we just kind of collectively address this? I think we all need, like, I'll speak for myself. I need a social worker and a therapist to sit down and say, talk to me about what you went through as a teacher during COVID in 2020. So let's acknowledge it, like you said, and maybe that's a first step. Would anybody like the last word? Yes, okay.
The story, it was written pre-COVID, but there is this one more example. But like, COVID did not happen in that or something like that, but it was a precautionary novel. Like,
Yeah.
if certain kind of a thing in terms of medical happens. So this novel is also, this is a German novel again. So the name of the novel is Corpus Delicti, and it is written by Ulysses in 2009.
Okay.
So this novel is about the health dictatorship. And in this, so basically, that the people, they have a certain routine, like we discussed, there was a sentence of like everything is monotonous and there is a structure. So they also like wake up at a particular timing. The caffeine is not allowed. It is banned to drink coffee or tea. Actually, they have the chips in their systems, and everything is monitored. If someone has a fever, this person is brought to the court, and then this person, the X-ray have been examined, and then it is shown on the screen. Okay, the cause has been it is detected. Okay, this person has maybe drank the coffee. That's why this person has fever or something like that. So maybe if COVID also is if it's continuous, and it also maybe I'm not saying it does, but if something like this happens again, maybe we are forced to come to this kind of repression also, that we would be living in this kind of environment where this kind of dictatorship runs.
That's a
It
great...
might be the case. It might be the futuristic like approach to cure this thing.
That's so excellent. So there's a kind of a connection between like political dictatorship
Yes.
and like lockdowns from illness, that
Because
kind
the
of
goal
thing.
is to take care of your health, and nobody has to die.
Yes, I see. Absolutely. Can we end on that note? Okay, we don't have to like say something cheerful, right? Like we're okay thinking about COVID representation. One more hour on this, and we're meeting at 9:30. Remember, not 10. And I appreciate you so